Hello, Emelda, can we start with the program? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm ready.
You start with the program now. Okay.
Okay. A warm good morning to all. Welcome to the 7th day of ILLUMINISMO 2021 International Webinar Series on the emerging trends in the interdisciplinary sciences and social sciences. Trends, issues, and directions facing family or SME business, ideas from the past and present research is the topic for today's webinar. We're extremely happy as of God, an eminent person, for handling this topic. It's our privilege to have Dr. Donella Caspersz with us today, who is a published researcher, teacher, and supervisor at the University of Western Australia, which ranks 92nd in the QS ranking list of universities. She currently specializes in research projects related to family business identity and sustainability in the information age. We welcome you all on the behalf of the Department of Management Studies of St. Pius X College, Rajapuram, to this webinar. Let us begin by invoking the blessings of God.
പ്രഭാത കിരണം തെളിയുന്ന വാനം പ്രപഞ്ചനാഥ നിൻകരവിരുതല്ലോ നിത്യപ്രകാശമാ നീയുള്ളിൽ വസിക്കുവാൻ സർവേശ്വരാ ഞങ്ങൾ കുമ്പിടുന്നു വിജ്ഞാനദാഹത്താ പയസ്ഥിതി തന്നിലെ കണി ചേർന്നണയുന്നോരി പൂക്കളിൽ ജ്ഞാനത്തിൻ സുഗന്ധവും നന്മ തൻ കാന്തിയും സ്നേഹത്തിൻ മധുരവും നിറച്ചിടണേ പ്രഭാത കിരണം തെളിയുന്ന വാനം പ്രപഞ്ചനാഥ നിൻകരവിരുതല്ലോ നിത്യപ്രകാശമാ നീയുള്ളിൽ വസിക്കുവാൻ സർവേശ്വരാ ഞങ്ങൾ കുമ്പിടുന്നു.
Now I invite Dr. Siji Syriac, Assistant Professor, Department of Management Studies, to welcome everybody gathered here. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Emelda. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. Good morning, one and all present here. Alvin Toffler, an American writer and businessman, has said once, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. The role of every institute of higher learning is to be a catalyst in this process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. ILLUMINISMO 2021, a 10-day international webinar organized by St. Pius X College, Rajapuram, is a humble effort in this direction to stay current and stay ahead. And we are at the 7th day of the 10-day international webinar series. And on this day, we at the Department of Management Studies are greatly privileged to organize 2 brilliant sessions on topics of great importance, especially at this period of the pandemic. The first session is on trends, issues, and directions facing family or SME business, ideas from past and present research. We know that SMEs are the key contributors to employment generation, innovation, exports, and inclusive growth of the economy. They are the backbone of the socio-economic development of our country. And this is one of the worst affected sectors due to the pandemic. So it is important that we discuss about the issues faced by SMEs. And we are greatly honored to have an eminent scholar with us who is an ardent researcher in this area, Dr. Donella Caspersz. Donella Caspersz. She is a researcher, teacher, and supervisor at the University of Western Australia. On behalf of St. Pius X College, Department of Management Studies, and all present here, a very hearty welcome to you, Dr. Donella Caspersz. May I wholeheartedly welcome Professor Biju Joseph, our principal and faculty of our own department, chairman of the webinar, and moreover, our team leader. Hearty welcome to you, sir. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Shinopi Jose, the head of the Department of Management Studies, who will be introducing our resource person. In fact, Dr. Donella is with us today because of the effort of Dr. Shinopi Jose. Hearty welcome to you, sir. I also would like to welcome Mr. Akhil Thomas, the department coordinator of this webinar, and he will be also proposing the vote of thanks. Welcome to you, sir. May I also welcome Dr. Sinosh Skariachan, the coordinator of the seminar, and all the teaching fraternity to this seminar. And finally, may I take this privilege to welcome all the inquisitive research scholars, students, and everyone present here to this session. Thank you.
Thank you, CG sir. I invite the principal of the college, as well as the chairman of the International Webinar Series, Biju Joseph sir, to felicitate this webinar.
Respected Professor Dr. Donella Caspersz, Head of the Department of Management Studies, Dr. Shinopi Jose, Dr. C.G. Syriac, the Department Coordinator of this webinar series, Mr. Akhil Thomas, respected teachers, students, and participants from other institutions. We are indeed privileged to have Dr. Caspersz as a resource person of the session today. Respected Professor, I'm sure that your research experience in the areas of family and SME businesses would be very much useful for us to understand the trends and issues in this particular sector. Though Dr. CG proposed a welcome address, as a head of the institution representing the entire college, the management, staff, and students of St. Pius X College, Rajapuram, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you, Professor. And I hope and firmly believe that this session would be an enriching session for all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Biju sir. I would like to invite Dr. Shinopi Jose, Head of the Department of Management Studies, to moderate the meeting and to introduce and welcome the resource person to the webinar.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Honorable resource person, Dr. Donella Caspersz, Professor Biju Joseph, the principal of the college, teachers, research scholars, students, and all dear participants. I love the ability to engage with the people through research and find out curious things about their behavior. I have taken this particular sentence from the profile of Dr. Caspersz, and I'm very much experienced with this true spirit of research experience or research approach that she upholds in her life. 6 months ago, I approached Dr. Caspersz with a research proposal as part of my application to postdoctoral forest fellowship. My research proposal was all about enhancing the skills of endosulfan victims based on sense capability approach using participatory action research PAR. She expressed her interest in my research proposal, and the directions, modifications, and suggestions she proposed were of very high quality, and I could successfully submit the application of a good quality on time. I remember the number of hours and days she spent with me for making this as a good draft. Unfortunately, I could not become successful in the final stage of Forest grant, but I'm sure, hopefully, in the near future, we'll be able to convert this research proposal into a funded research project. Dr. Donella Caspersz is a published researcher, teacher, and supervisor at the University of Western Australia Business School. She is highly involved in the supervising of PhD students, focusing on family business, labor migrations, and employment relations. Originally born in Sri Lanka, she completed all her education in Australia where she was raised. She joined the University of Western Australia in the year 2001 after completing her master's and PhD in industrial sociology, focusing on why people behave to change their world. One of Dr. Casperz's recent research projects that include, it relates to family, business, identity, and sustainability in the information age. She's collaborating with colleagues in the United States, Italy, China, Belgium, Sweden, and Pakistan. She is highly recognized throughout the university and has most recently received a Faculty of Teaching and Service Award for Research Supervision. Thank you. Over to Dr. Caspersz.
Thank you very much indeed. To all the my respected colleagues who are here on this particular webinar, and most especially the students who have joined us on the webinar, I say thank you very much indeed for your attention and for your presence here on the webinar. And I look forward very much to sharing with you over the next half an hour or so some of the ideas about research in the area of family business SMEs. I will just share my screen, and if you can just let me know that you are able to see my screen. Are you able to see my PowerPoint, please? If someone can let me know.
Yes, Professor, yes, we can.
Excellent. So let me put it into the presentation mode, and you can still see the presentation, or can you see the slide sorter? Which view do you have there? Do you have the full screen? Do you have the full screen or just the slide sorter? It doesn't matter. We can continue forward. Okay. My name is Donella Caspersz, and I am a what's called a research active academic here at the University of Western Australia in the Business School. And what this means is that I am research active, but I also have a teaching portfolio. In addition to teaching and research, as many of my respected colleagues know, we are also expected to do service in our universities. And with that, I'm what's called the UN Director of PRIME. PRIME is Principles of Responsible Management Education. And this is an accreditation that we receive from the UN for demonstrating how our research, our teaching, and our service aligns not just with prime principles of engaging with our community, but also with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And many of you will know that there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and the UN has a mission to try and see progress on these goals by the year 2030. Universities are very important in terms of seeing that progress. And so my service role very much revolves around this role that I have as the Director of Prime, and to see whether through our teaching, research and service, we can show how my university makes progress on the SDGs. Some of you may know where I live. I live in a place called Perth, which is in Western Australia. And these are some images of Perth. One is of the skyscape in Perth, and the top is of a beach. We are, of course, on the coast, and a lot of our life revolves around the coast, being on the beach, living outside. And the bottom image here, this image here, is of our river called the Swan River. And this, in fact, my university is on the banks of the Swan River. And we can see the Swan River from the university. So the images that I'm showing you hopefully depict for you that here in Perth we live very much a lifestyle outside. Of course, this is being challenged at the moment in our current environment of COVID-19 to be outside. In my country, I live on the West Coast, and we are very privileged on the West Coast to not be so besieged by the virus. On the East Coast, of course, in Australia, it's a very different story. And I know that in India, in many parts of India, you've had some great tragedies with the virus. So I wish you well in the future for this as we go forward. If I can also, just my next slide, is what we call an acknowledgement of country. You may or may not know, but Australia has the oldest Indigenous community in the world, 40,000 years old. And the Indigenous community have many tribes as such. And within those tribes, there are many areas of land that they lay claim to. My university sits on what's known as Noongar land. And it is customary for us to acknowledge that the campus is situated on Noongar land, and that the Noongar people remain the spiritual and the cultural custodians of the land and continue to practice their values, languages, beliefs, and knowledge. And this is an acknowledgement that we give at the beginning of any public presentation. I give this acknowledgement at the beginning of all my lectures, because it is an acknowledgement of the rightful owners of the land in Australia. In this seminar, what I would like to invite you to do is to ask questions of clarification. Perhaps because there are so many people, it might be a case of putting it in the chat. And what I will do is I will try and review those questions of clarification potentially as we move along, if I do have time, but certainly at the end of the presentation, I will look at the chat to see what the questions are, to then try and answer them as we go forward. So I have five aims in terms of my seminar. I want to clarify what is meant by family business and SMEs. We oftentimes put them into the same phrase, and we ask, is there a difference between these two entities? I want to talk about where our research was pre-COVID, because post-COVID, it has shifted somewhat. I want to just highlight for you what are some of the relevant journals and talk a bit about some of the organisations that might be relevant in this space, and then to just raise your awareness about some key events that I am hosting later in the semester that you are very welcome to join and to be a part of. There is just someone whose microphone is not muted, and the noise is coming through. Perhaps if you won't mind muting your microphone, that'd be great. So just again, just a little bit of background. I've been working in this area of family business, especially for now about the last 15 years. I am a scholar in the area of family business. I have served on what's called I've served on the board of what's called the International Family Enterprise Research Academy, which is a group of academics, and they host an annual conference each year on family business and within that SMEs. I'm also part of what's called Family Business Australia, which is the industry organisation here in Australia that represents family businesses. And my role on that entity is to be an academic advisor. And when I come to the end of the presentation, you will note that I have founded what's known as the Asia Pacific Family Business Symposium, which we try and hold annually, a symposium each year on family business research and issues. So I have an academic and also an applied practical understanding of family business that I hope you will find interesting. And of course, you are always invited to follow up with me later on. So my first, as with any scholarly activity, we've got to be clear what we are talking about. So I want to firstly define what we mean by the terms family business and SMEs. So a family business is a business that is governed and or managed with the intention to shape and pursue the vision of the business. But it is held by a dominant coalition controlled by members of the same family or a small number of families in a manner that is potentially sustainable across generations of the family or families. So this is the clear, distinctive characteristic, if you like, of a family business. Unlike other private enterprises, and most family businesses are private enterprises, we do not have ownership vested in shareholders, but rather ownership is vested in the family. And as the diagram of those three circles tries to depict to you, there is an overlap in family business between those who own the business, those who actually operate the business, and of course, the family. So the family has often ownership, and sometimes there's also non-family who have sometimes ownership, but family will have the majority ownership. There are family who often work in the business, but also non-family often work in the business. But as you can imagine, because of their ownership stake, the influence of what family believe should occur in the business quite often predominates. And this, of course, then is a very distinctive feature of family business. Family business runs across many different sizes of businesses. It goes across all industry sectors. You don't find family business in potentially limited industry sectors. So in some ways, it sometimes becomes a bit confusing when we are talking about family business to really get a tangible handle on what a family business is. But if we look out for the ownership of the family and therefore the influence of the family on the business, then we are coming close to identifying the business as a family business. So I've done a little bit of research about these matters in India, and we're told that in India, 85% of total companies are family businesses, contributing 80% to India's GDP. This is not unusual. In my country, Australia, it's estimated that 70% of businesses are family businesses, and they are the major contributors to GDP, to employment in particular. And this is, of course, a very important understanding when we are trying to then think of a rationale, if you like, for why we would be interested in family businesses and studying family business. But family business undoubtedly overlaps with SMEs, or small to medium-sized businesses. You may have heard of the OECD, the Organization for Can you hear me again, please?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, excellent. My screen gave me a sign that I was muted. So an SME is a non-subsidiary independent firm which employs fewer than a given number of employees, usually less than 250. SMEs can be different sizes though. We can have micro SMEs, and this is on the basis of 5 to 9 employees. Small, and this is where the term in India, I think you say micro, small, medium SMEs, MSME. So small SMEs are 10 to 49 employees, and medium are 50 to 249 employees. So the number of employees can be one basis that we use to define whether an entity is an SME. But financial assets can also define the SME. So in India, you have the SME Chamber of India, and this is from that particular chamber's information, where micro SMEs have an annual turnover that does not exceed rupees 5 crore, small SMEs not exceed 50 crore, and medium not exceed 250 crore. And as a comparison, the revenue of the Tata companies, which I'm sure many of you would know, the Tata companies in India, in 2019-2020, taken together was $160 billion. So I know dollars and crore are different, but we can see that it is quite significantly different. And the Tata companies collectively employed over 750,000 people. So large businesses are very different to SMEs. But when we look at the figures below in terms of the significant contribution of micro, small, medium-sized enterprises to the Indian economy, again, we have a very clear justification for why we should be interested in studying this entity and in studying how this entity, this business entity, can operate better and obviously can survive into the future, particularly beyond this particular period of time. So the question, are family business and SMEs the same in India? And this is from some of the research that I've picked up about these entities in India, where we know that on the left-hand side of my screen there, and hopefully yours, under the heading SMEs, India has a very... Hello? Okay, India has a very long history of business development, huge history. Business, enterprise, entrepreneurship are embedded in the Indian culture, really, as well as, of course, the Indian economy. And if we see the history of the evolution of business in India, we can see that from the 18th century, there was a role for SMEs up until, of course, our present period, starting with this economic liberalisation period of 1991. Family business, it's suggested though, emerged more definitely from this 1970s, 1980s period onwards, which of course is from that post-independence period in India, where there was then a greater emphasis on private sector development. And as I said, family business is private sector business. And family business, it's suggested through the research in India, flourished particularly from about that 1990s period, when, as we see, it corresponds with the economic liberalisation in India from that 1991 period. But this crossover between family business and SMEs lies and comes from that third point under the heading of family business, that in most SMEs, the owners are part of the management team. And then the next point, where research says to us that more than 60% of the 65 million MSMEs in India have some family members working either directly or indirectly in the family business. So whilst there is a clear feature that distinguishes family business, which of course is that there is family involvement in the business, mostly as a result of the ownership of the business, there is a clear crossover between SMEs and family business, because most SMEs are family business. And in most SMEs, you will find the presence of family, not just in ownership, but also in the management, in the operation of the business. And this is in India, as is the case in my country, as is the case in most countries. And there is a predominance of family business and SMEs in most countries around the world. So it's an important justification to know, because as researchers, as scholars, whether we are students, whether we are respected colleagues, we know that we've got to often justify why we focus on a particular unit of analysis, and undoubtedly their presence, the history and the involvement of family SMEs in our economies and societies gives us a clear justification for why we need more research about this particular business entity. So, having established our unit of analysis, let me go on to my next point, which is the focus for research pre-COVID. And this is by necessity more of a summary. You know, there are many, many research strands that the research has looked at. And what I am talking about is really more a summary of some of the dominant research strands. And of course, there are many nuances within these dominant research strands that maybe you might have a question about as we move along, that please post it in the chat, and I will more than happily answer your questions as we get towards the end of the presentation. So a clear matter that preoccupies family business, preoccupies SMEs, given this overlap between the two, is one of what we call succession. How do they maintain, how do they structure continuity? In a family business, we talk about dynastic succession, about how the family might succeed in the business. And this quite startling figure, which in real terms hasn't necessarily changed so much since Burkhardt and Dyer put this figure out there back there in 1983, which I know precedes many of the students who are here on this call today in terms of your lifetime. But it's still the case that only 30% of family businesses survive the transition to a second generation, and only 10% transition to the third generation. Today's world and the dynamics of COVID today have in fact raised the bar on this particular issue, because of course across particular industry sectors in which we have found family and SME businesses, the effects of COVID-19 have been most particularly felt. And we find businesses where they have had a long history of operation going out of business as a result of the dramatic effects of COVID-19. And so this question of how this entity will look like as it goes forward, will there still be family involvement? Will there be takeovers? Will there be mergers? This is now some of the issues that are preoccupying us as we go forward when we talk about this question of succession, and particularly in the case of family business, the question of dynastic succession, that is, whether there are members of the family. Hello? Was that a question that someone had? No? Okay. Whether there are members of the family who might take over this particular business. In the research, when we have looked at what are the problems and what are the challenges that have plagued the issue of succession, undoubtedly there have been individual level factors, the abilities of successors, their lack of motivation, the unexpected loss of a potential successor, and this issue of attachment, commitment. This has been something that has preoccupied us quite significantly. The commitment that the next generation might have to retaining the business in the family or keeping this SME continuing as it goes forward. And within the literature, this has taken up quite a lot of our research, focusing on trying to understand what fosters the attachment of potential incumbents to the business and keeps them going. And quite often, this is related to the next factor, the relational factors. The issues of conflict, trust, and again, lack of commitment. But the issues of trust, relational factor being a very important influence across generations, whether generations have got on, whether the incumbent generation is prepared to foster the participation of the incoming generation to enable them to fully be able to take over the business. So these relational factors have been an important stream in our literature. Obviously, the financial issues. In some countries, matters of taxation have plagued both family and SMEs in terms of continuity and in terms of succession. The inability to find financial resources, and this is particularly at this point in time, the issues of a credit squeeze, the ability to raise loans to fund growth and innovation to go forward. Obviously, contextual factors, and we've seen a lot of that most recently. The changes in contextual conditions that influence business performance, the business size, the market share, and process factors, again, very much connected to individual relational factors, but process factors about lack of role clarity, lack of communication about expectations, selection processes, and the absence of planning to succeed. And these have been streams within the literature that have preoccupied many, many research projects in the last numbers of years in terms of trying to unpack, understand, trying to find the country-specific maybe influences or the cultural-specific influences that contribute to the continuity or the succession of family, of the business in terms of it going forward. Two key issues that have come out of the literature over these numbers of years has been that of leadership and management, where undoubtedly in terms of the ways in which a family SME might operate, the relations might lead to conflicts between the members who are working in the business or who own the business. And there has been a very strong stream in the literature querying whether family just because they own the business, should they actually lead and manage the business? And this question, the foundations for this question lie in a very vibrant stream in the literature about the influence of emotions on the ways in which family, business, SMEs are led and managed, and whether the influence of emotions that emerge from the family itself, are they good for the business? Do they help the business to actually survive, to continue going forward? So with those sorts of thoughts, another very strong stream in the literature has been that of governance. How can the processes of decision-making, which is what governance is, how can this process of decision-making be structured so that the decisions that are made are not just made for the family in terms of keeping the family in mind, but also are good for the business? And this emerged in terms of when we had this growth of families in business from the 1970s and 1980s, how the involvement of the family affected the structure and the role of the governance system. As I say, should governance and should the structure of decision-making be first and foremost to meet the needs of the owners, which in a family and SMEs oftentimes is the family owners, or should it be always for the good of the business? And this, of course, you stand back and reflect, and I stand back and reflect about my environment here in Australia, the environment I know in Sri Lanka, where I come from. And we know that there are many, many influences that come to bear on this, what might seem to be a fairly simple question, because of course many people say, of course, decision making should be in keeping in mind the needs of the business. But there are many other influences that come to bear when we're talking about the family, about SMEs, about their size, about their ownership structures that come to caveat that sort of decision. So in, as I say, the little bit of research, there was one particular article that I came across that looked at this question of succession in India. The academics, Merchant et al., had a survey where they surveyed 287. They had a final sample of 287. And they had a sample which had 40% founders, where the rest were from other generations, across most of the key industry sectors and involving businesses with different size of employees, but in the MSME sector. And what they found in terms of the factors that came to influence the question of succession within the sample that they surveyed is most probably not that different to some of the matters that I have been speaking about. Questions to do with the inductee appreciation of the influence of mentors, motivation, the issues to do with the existence of tensions and harmonious management, and the the question from the inductee's perception about commitment. And this is, of course, when you have variables such as whether the workload is very high, because if there is commitment to the continuity and the succession of a particular enterprise, in my experience, the workload is not ever considered to be high. So this particular bit of research from from India, from academics from within India, finding that there are variables affecting succession, affecting the continuity of the family business, family SME in the Indian environment that most probably can align with what we know from the broader literature. So there is a companionableness in terms of what some of the findings have been about some of these questions in India and elsewhere. But I suppose the issue is that this research occurred mostly in a pre-COVID environment, It's not to say that these issues are not worthy of further investigation and further interrogation in our current environment. But of course, COVID is a contextual variable that has changed the parameters of what we look at quite a great deal. And this is what I want to talk about now, to talk about some of the focus for research post-COVID that is emerging in our literature, in our field, both within the family business, SME, and of course that crossover between the two areas. If I may just pause though, I've been speaking for some time, and just ask if there are any questions of clarification that anyone wants to pose to me. I'm just checking the chat to see if there are any questions there, and I can't see any questions posed there, but let me just invite, is there anyone who has a question for clarification that they would like to pose at this point in time? Can I ask those of you who are able to respond to me, am I speaking at a pace that is okay? Do you want me to speak a bit more slowly, or is it okay?
Donella, it is okay. It's okay. We are able to understand. Thing is that they will ask questions at the end. We'll wait for the questions after the presentations, I think. So that is the practice for the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much. I just didn't want to continue on with so much information. My students often say to me that, you know, I talk, I have a lot to say, and sometimes it's important to check in to make sure that we are keeping pace, but that's great to hear. So post-COVID, it's changed your world, it's changed my world, and it's going to change our world forevermore. So this particular infographic is taken from survey work conducted by my Australian Bureau of Statistics, whereby they surveyed businesses to understand what the impact of COVID-19 has been on the ways in which business are operating. And again, when you look at this, the variables here and the information here, you might say, oh yes, in India, we know this is also happening in India. And I'm quite confident that it is also happening in India. So we can see here that with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the key things that we find is, of course, the emergence of different ways in which people are now working. I'm not sure whether this is a trend in India, but in Australia, a lot more people are working at home rather than coming into organisations to work. And of course, this has then changed the way in which, as the infographic says, products or services are provided, and the types and the range of products and services that are offered. And we find that, and this is the statistic that interests us right at the bottom, that whilst a lot of big businesses have been able to make this shift and have been able to adjust, potentially small businesses have not been able to make a similar adjustment in the rapid amount of time required. Excuse me, just my voice was a bit, my throat was a bit irritated. So there's a lot of concern by governments, and I gather from the research I've done that there's a similar concern in India about the state of SMEs, and particularly as a result of COVID-19, where SMEs, very prolific, we know from those statistics, very significant contributors to the Indian economy, but we know that there has been a concern about SMEs as a result of COVID-19. So this is again from the OECD, and you may know the OECD is a global governance agency that covers a number of areas around the world. So their research and their findings come from research that they conduct globally. And what they note is that SMEs are overrepresented in sectors affected by the crisis, especially wholesale and retail trade, air transport, accommodation and food services, real estate, professional services. And they are typically more financially fragile and hence have smaller cash buffers. They have weaker supply chain capabilities, and thus the impact has been faster upon SMEs. But importantly, and this is something that many governments around the world have picked up, lacking in an uptake of digital tools and technologies, and as a result, struggling to adapt their business operations to the new ways in which business now is operating. So if you can recall my previous slide that focused predominantly on Australia and represented statistics from our Australian Bureau of Statistics, suggested that as a result of COVID-19, the way in which business operates is to be very much in the space of the teleworking, in the space of a data-centric, platform-based kind of operation. But this requires an infrastructure that we have found, particularly here, we found mostly in most places around the world. It requires an infrastructure that many SMEs did not have, did not predict that they would need to have. And as a result, the effects of the crisis and therefore then the ability to recover, and we talk about, and again, you may have heard the words such as agility, the agility for them to recover has been severely hampered by the lack of this infrastructure, but then also accompanying that, the lack of the skills and the knowledge, because it's not just a matter of having the digital applied capability in terms of the business operations, but also having people who are able to operate these in a fully functioning and efficient way. So this has raised a lot of concern about the continuity, and within that, issues of succession, dynastic succession even if you like, because one of the key issues, of course, for SMEs and family businesses, and so family businesses that are SMEs, is that with the dominance of the family and in the size of SMEs anyway, there is quite often a limited human capital potential in terms of having the people who have the knowledge, the skills to be able to work productively and efficiently for the benefit of the organisation, particularly with the rapid changes that have occurred in the way business does business through COVID-19. In India, in terms of the focus of India, and this is from the work of Kavil Ramachandran and his colleagues in the Indian Institute of Business, where they do have a family business centre, where the conclusion is that within India, we have this rapid change that has come about as a result of the changes of technology and socio-political forces, but also with India, and this is not just India, because it is the case in many countries around the world, we could say there is this extra concern or this extra challenge where there's the rapidly evolving society in which we find that the systems that were oftentimes embedded in sociocultural facets or sociocultural trends are themselves undergoing many structural changes. And we know this in many parts of the world, that there has been a progressive change in sometimes the ways in which societies are structured, the values, the norms that the societies have held are also changing. And as a result, this has created in some respects, some additional challenges, some additional benefits, but also some additional tensions. And you most probably are well versed in what I'm referring to when I talk, when I'm raising this in the context of India. But my studies, my research with my colleagues from across the world tell me that this is not a unique issue just in India, but there is rapid change at the level of society in terms of values and norms that sometimes is colliding, causing maybe some tensions, additional tensions in terms of how businesses continue to work, how businesses continue to survive going forward. And of course, COVID-19 has kind of overlaid that and has changed and created, even maybe exacerbated some of these tensions in some parts of the world. Theoretically, we can describe this as changes in the ecosystem of businesses. The term ecosystem, again, a term that I'm quite confident many of you have encountered, describes that social context that is surrounding entrepreneurial activity. And it refers to a set of resources, the human, the financial capital, the market knowledge, but also the cultural, the social, of course, the economic and the political networks. And the work of Stan is particularly prominent when we talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems, where the diagram, as we can see it on the right, comes from one of the research papers that Stan has, where it is a bit of a bubbling up and then bubbling down effect, where we find that there are institutional arrangements that influence what we call resource endowments that a business can utilize in terms of then generating outputs with respect to the value that they generate from their business. So for some time now, there has been shifts in terms of these institutional arrangements. And COVID-19, if you like, has exacerbated some of these shifts, maybe accelerated some of these shifts, and is creating ripples of change that then are throwing out new challenges, new exciting, new interests for us as researchers. One particular area that we have focused on is to try and understand what we call turnaround strategies during the pandemic. How has business reinvented their business model? So rather than talking about how have they refocused their strategy, when we think about the fact that many businesses have had to have staff working from home, they've had to develop an e-commerce capability, they've had to invest in digital infrastructure and the accompanying creative knowledges and skills, it is the case that it's not the strategy that has driven a lot of businesses going forward, but they've had to almost reinvent their business model. And this is the same for family SMEs, family businesses and SMEs. They've also had to look at at a set of turnaround strategies. And this is something that researchers are becoming more interested in. How have these businesses survived? What did they do? And what are the lessons for us in terms of what we take from this particular period in terms of then going forward? So this is just some research that the references are down the bottom, and it's research that I've been involved in a bit, where we find that Heineken, etc., put forward some key strategies that from their research they identified businesses as employing in terms of turning around their business model to survive during the period of the pandemic, where they rode out the storm. So they responded to immediate changes in customer behaviour in currently served markets. When we looked at Australian SMEs, we found evidence of some SMEs, and here we're talking about more SMEs between 20 to 49 in terms of the size, where they employed this strategy quite successfully, where they while turnover was down, they attempted to keep their staff at work and to try and make it work, to find ways in which they could continue to respond to customer behaviour in their current markets. So that then coupled and involved the next strategy, oftentimes exploiting a market change, looking to meet permanent changes in customer behaviour in currently served markets. Particularly, as my example of the restaurant says, a lot of businesses, a lot of those in the hospitality industry are continually now in takeaway mode, in online delivery, that this is now their new business model. Some of them don't intend to go back to having a face-to-face encounter with their customers post-pandemic, because they have found that the online, as I say, the takeaway kind of mode, particularly in that hospitality industry sector, has been good for them in terms of continuing to keep the business going. Others, though, have looked to try and exploit an emerging market, to look at what else they can do that has emerged from the customer base that they had. And this example of the bridal shop, where during the time of the downturn and since, they have pivoted. So we talk about they have pivoted in terms of being able to do something else. And this particular business, they started to make doctors' gowns, part of the protective equipment. And then others looking at an entirely new market. And this particular business at Detmold, they have now invested in a local manufacturing capability to actually manufacture personal protective equipment for the medical industry from here on in. So Detmold, we still call an SME in Australia because it is still under the 250 threshold. It is a global company, and it is a company that particularly operates in this particular part of the world, our world. I'm talking about the Asia Pacific world. And it is a company that is a third generation family business. So we have started to say, well, what did business do to turn themselves around during the period of the pandemic? Because this then gives us a lot of information about how we might think about issues of succession, issues of leadership, issues of governance going forward in terms of how businesses can think what they should do in this post-COVID period. Aligned with that, and this is something that is a particular interest of mine, is the evidence that a lot of businesses are looking to try and focus more on this concept of responsible leadership, the art of building and sustaining good relationships to all relevant stakeholders. So for many, a long time, we have had the concept of corporate social responsibility, and we say that in the space of SMEs and family businesses, there is a set of particular values around which these businesses operate. If we think about family businesses, quite often the values of a family business, the values of an SME that has got family involvement, are values that are very significant for the society at large, values to do with caring about their community, wanting to see the success of their community, wanting to nurture a next generation, wanting to have a business activity that then gives back to the business. And so issues of, or some of the principles around corporate social responsibility, they haven't been explored terribly much in the area of SMEs, and this is a potential area for further research. But more than that, perhaps it's more than the CSR, it's potentially also this concept of responsible leadership, that because these businesses are that smaller, they are that more embedded, engaged with their community, they have an affinity with their community, that potentially maybe lead their businesses in a way that delivers value, not just for the business, but also for other stakeholders, for their community at large, their community of suppliers, of customers, all those steps in their value chain that they then interact with. And this is this concept of responsible leadership. And if you reflect back on the slide I showed you about the turnaround strategies, and you think about some of the examples that I was trying to illustrate some of those turnaround strategies with, you potentially remember two businesses that started to manufacture in the area of primary protective equipment, or the personal protective equipment. And this is an illustration of what we might say illustrates a responsible leadership approach, where it wasn't just pivoting, or it wasn't just developing an agility to continue to manufacture so that the business continued to be doing good. But in the case of Detmold, they used to manufacture the product that McDonald's would use in terms of the packaging that McDonald's would use to package their products. And it's not to say that they still don't do that, but they've moved into this other area of manufacturing where they now are manufacturing what will be important, crucial equipment as we go forward in terms of helping societies and economies to recover. And in the little bit of research that I've done, and it's not just me that's doing research in this area, there are others. It's a pilot stage research of 12 primary interviews, and also what we call grey material, which is looking at company websites, looking at their promotional material, looking at really published material that there might be about the company and incorporating that into the analysis. My colleagues and I came up with this particular 2x4 that you see, not quite a 2x4 yet, but on the way to becoming a 2x4 that you see in front of you, where on one axis we have the variable of responsible leadership, on another axis we have that of crisis management. And in our research so far, we said that in the time that we interviewed our respondents, we found that their crisis management strategies went from wanting to stem the decline that they were experiencing as a result of COVID-19 to stabilising their business proposition, and now to looking at recovery strategies. On the other axis, we then plotted the fact that in terms of responsible leadership, as I say, it encompasses the community more broadly rather than just stakeholders, where undoubtedly at one end there are the shareholders and the owners in terms of delivering value to that entity, given they own the business. But we also found that within the companies that we looked at, there was also developing this thought that they also needed to look after, obviously, customers, but employees, suppliers and distributors, and the community more at large. And here is where we, at the top end of that axis, we talk about the fact that the focus is on stakeholders and owners. The indicators in between are the companies that we interviewed. And I just want to draw your attention to those. Hello? I just want to draw your attention to those that have a blue dot against them. So this is that company Detmold that I gave you the example about. And as you can see, at the start of the crisis, their strategy was very much to stabilise. But as time has moved on in terms of the recovery strategies that they are employing, they now are starting to broaden their horizon in terms of what they should be looking at, to also now encompass more employees in terms of how they deliver what they do in terms of the value of their organisation. So this is a manufacturing organisation. This particular company is a construction company. And this company, at the time of the crisis, they moved from decline stemming. They actually had quite a degree of digital infrastructure in the company when the crisis did hit. So they looked to really stabilise what they were doing and to try and keep their employees. So they were quite high in terms of the responsible leadership spectrum, but they have gone higher still, not in their recovery strategies, where they are now looking to try and ensure that their suppliers, their distributors, also have a stability in terms of their business case for them to be able to continue to serve this company in the supply chain as they go forward. And finally, this particular company, in terms of, again, another manufacturing company, again, having a capability to start with when this crisis hit, but as they've broadened, as the crisis has continued, they have broadened the focus of what they consider to be their lens in terms of their responsibility and how they need to interact with the community, to being quite high, really, in terms of the parameter of responsible leadership, that they see that they have responsibility to ensure that their stakeholders, plus their owners, get the value that's delivered from their business case. So how businesses operated has been a clear preoccupation in the research post-COVID. Because when we think about those statistics I showed you right at the beginning about the significance of the MSMEs and family business in India, as well as elsewhere, we must be preoccupied with this, because understanding these nuances is very important for our societies and economies as we go forward. So it just brings me coming towards the end of my presentation. I think as scholars, I'm not sure how much you know about the relevant journals and organisations in this area of family and small to medium-sized research. This is a listing of the top 25 most cited journals from a particular piece of research that was done in 2015. Undoubtedly, these journals cover both family business and SMEs, and you will find a lot of scholarship in these journals. Premier Family Business Review is a premier journal, but also the journals Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, and of course some of our strategy journals are also journals where you will find research, good research, and research from your scholarship in India in terms of family and small businesses. And my final topic that I just want to briefly talk about are two key events that you are all very welcome to join and to be a part of. They are both online, and you can connect and register online. Behind these two headings are the links, and I'm very happy to share this with my respected colleagues at St. Pius, and you can hopefully distribute to everybody who has been on this particular webinar. The first is the, well, in terms of date, the first is the annual Contemporary Issues in Family Business lecture on September the 16th. It is at 6 o'clock my time, so it's in the evening. It is online and face-to-face. Professor George Kalis is the speaker, and this is an annual event each year that I host. And Professor Kalis is the executive chair of the MG Kalis Group. This is a second generation family business, a very successful family business in Australia, more to the medium size rather than the small size. Primary production, mainly fishing, is what they do. And he's talking about innovation in family business, and this might be an interesting topic for you. The link at the top here, the Asia Pacific Family Business Symposium on September 30th. It starts at 1:30 my time and goes through till 9:30 my time. It is a symposium. It is a collection of research papers, but also practice papers. I'm hosting the symposium with my colleagues in Japan. We have 28 research papers that will be presented, but we also have papers by the what's called the Grant Thornton Group, which is a mid-tier accounting services firm, a global firm. We also have Family Business Australia giving us a presentation, but we also have a presentation by the Takanawa Family Business, which is a Japanese family business that was established in 1610 in Japan. The aim of the symposium is to profile scholarship in our region. And this is something that I hope with time we will have more of a presence of Indian scholarship at the symposium in terms of showcasing that scholarship. In the symposium this year, we have scholarship from Singapore, from Japan, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from China, from Australia, of course. So we're very privileged to have this breadth of scholarship. And the whole aim is to really showcase and provide an opportunity for there to be a networking of scholars, and that is both student and also respected colleagues. I have come to the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you very much for listening. It has been, I'm sorry, I seem to have a tickle in my throat. It has been a privilege to present to you. I hope you have many, many, many questions. If you don't feel like asking a question today, that is quite fine. You have my email there. You can always email me. I'm very pleased to hear from scholars in the region, and I mean students as well as those in academia in terms of sharing the scholarship. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Donella. We have a few questions in the chat box. Will you please address that?
Yes, I'm just going to have.
We have, I think, there are one or two questions in the chat box, I think.
So how effective are industry associations in influencing the family SME business in Australia? They are effective. There is the, as I say, I'm involved in Family Business Australia. We also have a very vibrant small business association that has been very much at the forefront of policy input, both these organisations at the forefront of policy input, particularly during the COVID-19 period, and particularly with respect to government assistance for this particular sector in terms of during the pandemic and now going forward. So these associations have been highly influential in encouraging the government, for instance, to really promote very proactively a digital strategy in terms of this particular sector. And this strategy, the components are not just the provision of funding to develop infrastructure, but also the opportunity to have training in terms of being able to use the infrastructure most effectively for the particular business. So I think they have been effective. Their effectiveness comes also from their membership base, and their membership being very important influences in terms of encouraging the association to really connect and interact, particularly with government. In Australia, government is very important in terms of setting the scene. And we have, perhaps I think like India, we have a federal, we have a state government. So working across that has been very important. But I would say they have been very important, particularly over the last year. So how about the legal and statutory requirements to start SME business in Australia when comparing with other parts of the world? Is it stringent or is it liberal? It is, I wouldn't use the word stringent. It is very regulated. There is a degree of regulation around which businesses can be established. That regulation, of course, crosses over into taxation requirements, and therefore then the need for there to be certain matters that are kind of abided by from that particular perspective. However, having said that, there is a lot of encouragement for there to be a lot more business development, particularly small business development within our particular environment. I think Australia is not unusual from many countries around the world that now recognise the really pivotal role that the SME sector has in terms of not just enabling economies and society to recover because they might provide, for instance, the opportunity for employment, but also for innovation. the size of these entities is such that there is quite a degree of research and there is much more recognition that because of their size, the degree of innovation, the rate at which innovations happen is actually a lot different. It's not bureaucratic, it's much flatter, much less vertical, more horizontal. And this is something that I think there is some attempt to try and encourage. So in my particular jurisdiction in Australia, there is a lot to try and assist businesses in that SME or MSME sector, family business sector, to engage in innovative activities, in thinking about how they can innovate their production processes, not just through creating, the next best instrument, but also the process of how things are done. And this is when I'll come back to the fact that when the crisis hit, one of the clear shortfalls was the lack of the digitization of the sector, because adding on digital capability enables a different thinking about the process and hopefully having a greater creativity about the output from business productions. Thank you for those questions. There are more, I think, now. Okay, so comparing all countries, how seems influence, or how is India in comparison to other countries? I think that every country have their own unique influences. And this is something that has to come from the history of a country and from the sociocultural environment. And so there is always a uniqueness about a particular space in terms of how matters might pan out. Having said that, I don't think the challenges being faced in India are so different to the challenges that the sectors are facing in countries elsewhere. I think as I say, the gap in terms of digitization is something that has been found for MSMEs and family businesses across many different spaces. So in Australia, as well as I think most probably in India. The question is, I suppose, how can we respond more than what are the comparisons? And I think this is the challenge, particularly in countries like your country, like my country, that are very heavily influenced by government. How can government become agile in terms of responding to some of the challenges that businesses are facing? We have your symposium organisers are asking me to please feedback your comments. Does the change in the ecosystem affect family business or SMEs? It affects both, because family businesses are just as embedded in the sociocultural fabric of any community as SMEs are. The added complication is, of course, the influence of the family. Like you said, there are millions of SMEs are here, but 1/3 of these SMEs are dissatisfied due to the performance of family members in the management. I think this is due to the lack of knowledge about leadership and business management. What is your opinion about it? And this is something that certainly that research by our colleagues Merchant and et al. Identified, a sense of dissatisfaction about the performance of family members in the management. And this is where I suppose COVID-19 has accentuated some of these issues. And why? On the one hand, we find that businesses have to be much more agile. They have to be able to pivot much more quickly. A core facet or feature of that has been the add-on that digital capabilities might offer. And what has been found is that there has not just been the infrastructure, but there hasn't been the skills and the knowledges amongst some of the current employees, oftentimes who are family, to be able to do that. So that's created one set of problems. The other set of problems that come mostly from the question are that within a family SME, there is always this conflict of in which direction will the business operate? Will it operate more for the benefit of the family? Will it operate more for the benefit of the business? And this is a question that goes back and forth. So this is something that I suppose some businesses have tried to reconcile by professionalizing the business, having more non-family in charge of the business so that the person who is at the peak or at the top of the governance structure is not so plagued by this, by emotions or by the influences of the family. Others have tried to manage this by, of course, the whole education process of family members. And others have created a business structure which potentially separates more and more the ownership from the management of the business. So separates the family who might be owners from the family who might be managers. And those businesses have maybe set up other structures, perhaps what we call a family council or some sort of advisory committee that maybe is made up of the family that connects with someone in the business so that the views of the family aren't lost, but that family influence doesn't dominate in terms of the management of the business. And they have been some of the ways that businesses have gone about managing some of the dissatisfaction that might be there as a result of the involvement of the family. I hope that answers your question. Is there a policy to protect the SMEs in Australia? If yes, what are the prominent policies? If you mean policies to do with, in the recent COVID-19 period, there were policies that were introduced in terms of the calling in of loans, if you like, the protection against banks actually asking businesses to forfeit because of bankruptcy, knowing that for a lot of businesses, they were having to restructure their business model because of the changes in the way that business was doing business during the pandemic. So there were some of those policies that were around. Those policies potentially aren't there so much anymore. And what we found is that there are businesses now that are going bankrupt, but we know that in the business world, that is the case quite often, that there is a percentage of businesses that will always fold, if you like, because of the changes in the context and the market share, etc. But we found that with that period of time, that period of grace, if you like, that was there during the pandemic, it gave other businesses the opportunity to restructure the way in which they did business so that they were potentially stronger to be able to go forward post, well, we're not post the pandemic, but in the recovery period of the pandemic. What is the logic between the categorization of first generation, second generation, and so forth? So usually we talk about the founder, the person who finds or, finds the business, sets the business up. The first generation are quite often the children of the founder. The second generation are the children of the founder, and so we go on. And that's how we move on. So this Japanese family business that will speak at the symposium, that was founded in 1610. I think they are into their 12th generation or 13th generation, very old family business. The family businesses that survived the transition to second and to third generation is in the ratio of 3:1. What is the key drivers and challenges that derail the succession plan? Quite often, one of the key things is that there is no one wanting to succeed. So the family might want to have a succession plan, but there is no successor. This might be for many reasons, like in China, for instance, because of some of the issues to do with the limiting of numbers of children that people could have had up until relatively recently. There was a real problem with having people to succeed in the business. So you would sometimes find when daughters married, the son-in-law would change his name to that family so that there was a clear successor for the business. So there are sometimes those logistical problems that are found in some parts of the world. Sometimes it is that the next generation have got different interests. They might have, instead of wanting to run a business, they want to be a doctor, they want to be a lawyer, they want to be something else. And this can certainly derail the succession plan. And in other parts of the world, what sometimes derails a succession plan is the question of ownership, the question of investment, where particularly in places like Germany, the successor has to buy the business from the founder. And sometimes they don't have that capital to be able to do that. And that then might change the way in which the succession plan was envisaged going forward. How much do you think SMEs can solve the problem of underemployment in the present post-pandemic times? I think SMEs have a lot of potential to solve this problem. In my country, SMEs are a very key contributor to this problem already. Australia has been fortunate. We are only a small population, particularly in comparison to India. So we have been not felt the devastation as much as what has been felt in other parts of the world. But that entrepreneurial spirit, that keenness to establish your own entity, your own income generation, own value generation enterprise is something that, of course, has potential to soak up unemployment. The question is what sort of unemployment? We know that the way work now is done because of the application of digital technologies to processes of production, sometimes people aren't able to work full-time because there isn't that capacity any longer. So the question is, how much employment can it soak up? How could COVID affect the future family business and what are the advantages? I think some of the advantages lie in what I'm talking about in terms of responsible leadership. I think it gives an inner strength to the business, and it also gives the business an opportunity to really craft a marketplace that has got a lot of depth rather than just breadth, and that can be a benefit. Strategic tools and techniques for SME business in post-COVID time. This is a very big question, and one that most probably I should imagine your Chamber of SMEs is spending a lot of time thinking about, and one that perhaps we can look at to the research. But a very significant emphasis that's coming forward is the need for business planning, and business planning in this new way, not necessarily along the strategic way, but the sort of model now that business has to think about adopting. And how can you differentiate the current situation of SMEs in India and Australia? I don't know whether I can, to be honest, because I'm not as knowledgeable as I need to be about SMEs in India. I think the only thing I can say from what I do know is that there is the same focus on SMEs in both India and Australia as being a very significant entity to help both our economies and societies going forward in the post-COVID period. Thank you so much for all your questions. They have been tremendous questions to have, and I hope I've helped you somewhat in answering them. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Caspersz. I'm Sinosh Kariyachan. I'm a faculty of science, especially in one area, microbiology. So thank you very much for insightful and wonderful lectures about the various aspects of SMEs in COVID and post-COVID era, and you have highlighted various aspects. And a non-management person like me, it was really an insightful and provide a lot of insights actually. And my question is, you had highlighted the research aspects in pre-COVID era and post-COVID era actually. So when you are talking about the pre-COVID era, there was a lot of conventional approaches for the research to make the business prototypes. Then during the lockdown, people did not have the adequate access to the infrastructure to conduct the research, and they could not make the adequate prototype. And the post-COVID era also, people are having some challenge. And how will you connect these three? And what are the various challenges in terms of the research prototype model that is useful for the MSME, what you are going to experience in post-COVID, post-pandemic era? And what is your suggestion? What is the perspective in Australia? Can you throw some light on?
Sure. I think when you are speaking, it's very useful that you have identified these three phases, because I think they are also corresponding to our thinking research-wise. So in the pre-COVID period, we were very preoccupied with the strategy of business. How could business organise its resources to get a strategic advantage in a marketplace? In the COVID era, we started to realise that it wasn't just about the business creating its strategy. The changes being brought to bear on business because of COVID, the need to work online, the need to have teleworking, the need to look at different ways that business could continue to survive as we are today in this online world, both from a production as well as a supply, as well as, of course, in terms of its whole operations. And this was a very big lesson that we have learned, because we have learned that it's not just about the strategies, it's not just about the business saying, this is the market we want to have, this is the product we want to produce. It's also about the way in which the business does it. So we talk about the shift to now thinking about the business model. And the business model, within that business model, we now are very clear that we have to think not just about the desired aims of the business, but how the business engages, particularly with digital technologies, and what this means in how the business then presents itself and sees itself. So this is where this issue of responsible leadership comes in, because this is a focus that going forward in this post-COVID period, where we've all become so concerned about issues of the space, we wear masks so that we don't have the close encounter with others. We know that we need to keep sanitizing our hands. We know that there are certain places we can't go. So we have a greater awareness about how we connect in our particular economies and communities. And I think families, SMEs going forward, because they are predicated on these values of the values of the founder, the values of the people that own the business, they almost have a bit of an advantage to tap into this sentiment in our community. But this tapping in is not from the perspective of the strategy, the market share, etc., but the sort of business that the business wants to operate, the business model. And I think as we go forward, there's more and more interest in the concept of business models and how business models can emerge to provide business with the opportunity and the stability that it needs. And that then supersedes the size issue. It's an issue that's relevant to the micro, the small, the medium, and of course the large going forward. And can I say, in India, we look, I talk about the Japanese family business being so old, but India, you have such old and you have such big family businesses, of course, that are very able to provide a lot of very important lessons. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Caspersz.
Okay, Imelda. Hello. Imelda is there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please continue.
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful session. Now I invite Akhil Thomas, sir, Assistant Professor, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, one and all. Principal Sri Biju Joseph, invited chief guest of the session, Dr. Donella Caspersz, Dr. Shinopi Jose, head of the department, Dr. Siji Siriek, respected teachers, and all the participants. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. Today's webinar was full of knowledge and interesting things. Dr. Caspersz explained the recent trends and issues in family business and SMEs based on the results she attained from her research work. Her presentation addressed key issues of identity and sustainability of business, people, and the wider community. SMEs contributes 8% of the GDP and 40% of exports from India. Family businesses are fairly prevalent in India and play a prominent role in the country's business scenario. Thus, Casper's views are relevant in our native business environment too. Dr. Caspersz, in spite of her busy schedule, found time for us and enriched our knowledge. Thank you, Dr. Caspersz, for your very interesting and thought-provoking address. This webinar series is the result of the untiring efforts of Sri Biju Joseph, our principal. We are continuously impressed by his leadership skills and his ability to unite the entire stakeholders of our college. We are grateful for all you do. Thank you so much for being such an impactful leader and motivating us. Dr. Shinopi Jose is the man behind this webinar. He has shown great commitment to the college and is hugely respected for it. With a deep sense of appreciation, I thank Dr. Shinopi Jose for making this program a reality and huge success. Dr. Siji Siriek is a man who always brings healthy perspectives to our college. I thank him for his contributions to make this webinar a success. I also use this opportunity to thank Dr. Sinosh Karyachan, convener of ILLUMINISMO 2021, for his continuous support and time-to-time guidelines. More than 300 participants, including teachers, research scholars, and students from our college and from various other colleges, participated in this webinar. I thank you all for making this webinar a grand success. Thank you all.
Thank you, Atul sir. Once again, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Donella Caspersz for your wonderful and informative session. By thanking everybody who participated in this webinar once again, I conclude the meeting has officially ended. Thank you.